This video is about restoring the hood of a Beogram 3000. I will show how to install new mounting brackets. Then I will go on and show how to reinstall the spring that keeps the hood open. And I will also demonstrate how to patch cracked hood hinges, which happens quite frequently with these hoods of those Beogram 3000s. For more information, please visit my blog at beolover.blogspot.com or go to my website at www.beolover.com. Here you see a beautiful Beogram 3000. The hood can be removed by simply pushing it out backwards. And so let's have a look how this looks like when the hood is out. Okay, so here is the hood taken out. The parts that hold the hood to the body of the turntable are these mounting brackets here. One here and one over there, and you see here there is this groove, and this groove here that slides onto the aluminum plate that is on top of the turntable and that holds the hood in place. What holds the hood open are these two springs here, and they are tangented by this block that is in the center of that aluminum bracket that is at the back of the hood. Okay, let's have a close-up look at one of those hinges. This here is the plexiglass part that often breaks off here right in the center. And this here is one of those brackets. And so you see here, this one here is in great condition. And so this is the part that usually breaks out. And then the hood doesn't stay on top of the turntable anymore. So now you know how it's supposed to look. This here is the hood that I received to fix. And you see here that the plexiglass hinge part is completely broken off. Somebody already tried to fix it with the wrong glue and spreads the stuff all over the place. So all in all, a pretty ugly situation. But I will demonstrate that one can recover from this here fairly neatly and bring that hood back to life so that it can serve again on a Beogram 3000. As if a broken off plexiglass hinge weren't enough, this turntable also needed new mounting brackets, and so you see here the original mounting bracket it came with, and this plastic strip is all that holds the hood to the turntable top aluminum plate. And you see here in the back already part of this strip came off, and the front part here is also already breaking off. You see here this crack, and so once this part is gone, then the hood wouldn't be held in place anymore on this side of the turntable. And so in this video now I will also show you how to replace this here with a 3D printed part that restores this slide-in mechanism. Okay, let's do it. So the first thing when it comes to separating the aluminum part in the back of the hood from the plexiglass part of the hood is to release these two springs that I pointed out in the beginning of the video. And so what holds these springs in place is this mounting block. And I wish I had filmed it when I took it out, but I didn't. And the real issue is here, once it's out, you cannot get it back in anymore without a lot of effort. And so I don't show here how to release these springs, but essentially what you have to do is to use a screwdriver and unscrew this screw, and that will loosen up this plastic block, and then you can pull out these springs here. And when you do that, you will feel immediately there is a lot of force on them, and as soon as they are out, they will snap into their relaxed position, and then it is virtually impossible to get them back in here. But I will show you how to recover from that when we put the hood back together. After releasing the springs, we can take out the plastic brackets. And so we need to remove those bolts in the back first, and then we can take out those 3 bolts that hold the bracket in place. So once the bolts are out, then the plastic part just comes off. So if all you want to do is replace the plastic brackets, then you can stop right here. If the hood needs to be removed from the aluminum part in the back, then you need to bend these side pieces a little bit out, not too far so they don't break off from the aluminum part. And then there's enough space, then you can take the hood off the shafts that are welded to those side pieces. So after taking out the plexiglass hood, it's time to fix the broken off hinge part. And for that, I designed these laser cut patches that match exactly the shape of this hinge. And so we will now fuse all of this together to restore the hinge part. So the first step is to line up these two parts precisely and clamp them together. So we can then infuse them with plexiglass solvent. Okay, so now they are together, and now the next step is to see if this fits here properly. And so you just hold it together and then see if everything lines up here as it should. One thing to keep in mind when gluing plexiglass, once it's glued, so there is no way back. So this has to work the first time you do it. And so if this doesn't line up very nicely here, then it's time to redo this clamping until things line up. And then we can fuse everything together. This here shows the tools of the trade. What I use for this kind of plexiglass gluing is number 4 weld-on acrylics glue. This is not really a glue, it's rather just a solvent that dissolves the acrylic, and then when the solvent evaporates, the two parts essentially are welded together. What you also need is one of those little bottles here with a needle applicator, and so you simply put a little bit of this solvent in here, and then you can squirt it out onto the seams of the part and fuse them together. So here you see this applicator bottle with the needle, and so the trick that one uses here in order to have some control over the solvent that comes out of the needle is to press a little bit of the air out, so that once you release the bottle, air is being sucked in, and that keeps solvent from going out, and that gives you control even if you hold the bottle upside down. And so this is what I'm doing here. I'm squeezing a little bit of air out. I held my hands there so that nothing would squirt into the room. And then you see here, I simply squirt a little bit at the seam, and if you looked real close, then you saw how the solvent here, by capillary force, got sucked in between the two parts. This is what happens. So you don't have to apply this acrylic solvent on either part and then put them together like you would do when gluing cardboard or something of that nature. Here you simply press the parts together, and then you put that solvent on the seam, and it gets sucked in by those capillary forces, and that is all you need to do. Now it's time to leave this alone here for at least 2 hours, and then we can fuse it on here all together. So here we are 2-3 hours later. You can take off the clamp, and you see it's a pretty solid bond already. Now one thing to keep in mind is that after 2-3 hours this has not full strength yet. It takes about 24 to 48 hours until it is as strong as it can be. But after 2-3 hours it's good enough to do the next gluing step and fuse this part here now to the hood. Okay, and now we do essentially the same like before. We match it up and we clamp it together, and then it's time to add some solvent and fuse these two parts together. And this is what we see here. You notice here I put something under the hood and gave it a little bit of downward slant here. The reason for that is when you add the solvent here now, very likely a little bit of solvent will run off and drip off the hood, and so it's good if it goes downhill here, otherwise the solvent could flow into the hood, and then of course you can imagine what happens once the solvent is on the hood. There is nothing you can do but letting it evaporate, and after that you have to polish the hood in this area because it will have been dissolved a little bit, and of course after the solvent dries it's not as perfect as it was before. So here we go. Just a little bit of solvent again, and we are done with this part of the hood. So now it's time to let this cure for 48 hours, and then you can put the hood back together with the aluminum part in the back. Okay, here we are, 24 hours later. I took the clamp off, and you see now everything is fit together. You see how nicely the laser cut patch fits on the hinge. And so this side of the hood is okay for use again. Now let's look at the other side. So if one hinge is broken off, it's a good idea to have a close look at the other one. And so you can see here that already a hairline crack is developing. And so it's a good idea to put a patch on here too. And so here it's much easier, of course. One can just clamp it on and then put solvent on there. Just squirt a little on, and that is enough. And so now we wait another 24 hours. And this here is the end result after 24 hours. You see here there are a few air bubbles where the solvent didn't make it to, but overall the solvent penetrated the entire part, and so this is attached very well, and the hinge here is stabilized. Okay, now we're ready to put everything back together. One important item is that there are these sleeves on the shafts that are welded to the aluminum side panels. This is shown here. So you see here this comes off. This is a metal sleeve, and that goes into the plexiglass hinge. So it's important that this is still there when you put everything together. And so now it's inserted here. And now we can do the other side. This shows the other side. And now, of course, because the broken hinge is reattached, we have to bend out the side panel a little bit in order to create some space here that we can put the plexiglass part on top of the sleeve. And so that's what you see here. So I bend it a little bit and then put it back together. And so now we're ready to put those plastic brackets on. So back to the other side. To insert the bracket, you first need to put the spring in, and have a look here. This disc needs to sit on this second bend of the spring. And there is actually a little cutout in the disc that fits on the wire. It's not clearly visible here, but if you did this yourself, you would see immediately what I'm talking about if you look at this disc. So it needs to be assembled like this, and then you basically hold the spring in place, and it needs to go in here into this gap of the plastic bracket. And so this is what I'm doing here. So it needs to fit actually into this groove in the back of the plexiglass, and when it sits properly here with the disc in place and everything, there shouldn't be any strain on it. So it sits slightly loose, but kind of held in place firmly by this gap in the plastic bracket. And now we can put in the bolts. Don't super tighten them yet in this stage, because there is one more bolt that goes in from the back. We will see that in a few seconds. And remember, this hinge had a broken out bolt here, and so there is nothing one could screw that nut on anymore. But luckily this holds together with two bolts, since there is this third one that comes in from the back here. And so this is that screw in the back. And now we do this on the other side. Here we still have all three bolts and the back screw. Okay, before we can use this hood again, the final step is to put these springs under tension again, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated if you want to use the original block that holds these two springs down, because one has to turn both at 180 degrees and then hold them in place and at the same time bolt this block on, and there's quite a little bit of force on these springs, and so you would need about 4 hands to do this comfortably. And I didn't like that, and so I developed a replacement block and a tool that makes this procedure a snap. Here you see the two blocks in comparison. This is the original one, and so these two gaps here are where the springs are being pushed against the aluminum, and this is where the bolt goes in. And so you see here my replacement part. It exchanged these two gaps with two slots that hold those springs securely in place, and these two holes are used to insert a tool with which one can turn it around and then bolt it down. And this is what you see here. So the springs go into these slots, and then the tool is inserted into these two holes, and make sure it's in this orientation. Otherwise, you can't turn it around enough to insert the block on the bolt here. And so now you just hold it in place with one hand, and with the other hand you can put in this nut and bolt it down. And that's it. So a very simple and straightforward process with this slightly changed design. And now we're done, so let me demonstrate how nicely everything fits. So this is the hinge patch, it's not in the way, right? It fits perfectly to that bracket. Okay, here you see it installed. The 3D printed brackets fit exactly like the original ones, so you have a tiny gap here between the aluminum part and the wood plinth. And let me demonstrate how it closes. And so the good news here is that one can't even see the crack while it's closed. So I think this fix is pretty neat, definitely better than having a cracked hood. This concludes my video about restoring the hood of a Beogram 3000. If you would like to purchase the parts that I demonstrated in this video, they are available. Just send me a message using the contact form on my blog, beolover.blogspot.com, or send me an email. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.